back to another episode of Farewell Evangelion, the series where we go through the full Neon Genesis series, bit by bit. My name is Keith, and I'm going through for his last time. And as always, I am joined by Peter.
Hello!
Who is going through for his first.
And possibly also last.
Time will tell. But you're not getting off the train yet.
No, I still have...
Specifically the train cart that all problems are solved on.
Yeah, I have more loops to go, because as we now know, this series is all about loops.
Exactly.
Loops within loops.
And today, we are focusing on another character, continuing that series. And with the poll we had, the winner of going first was Asuka. Asuka was very much a clear winner from the start, and everyone started catching up to her, but by the time we were like a few hours away from the poll closing, it was pretty clear it was going to be her. And then we had the next two neck and neck pretty much, and it was a coin flip for those two.
So that's what we did. We coin flipped and then chose the one we liked more. Fuck you, we choose. So Asuka.
So this one's a bit weird.
Because we're not just talking about one character in our talk about... in our episode that is supposed to be dedicated entirely to one character, we're actually mainly focusing on two separate characters that fill similar roles.
And to be fair, both these characters are pretty much the same character. It's just, Ono has even stated, the reason there's a different name on this character is they end up being significantly different enough from the original Asuka that it warranted doing a different name. This is more of context within the story-wise and not so much the character themselves, I guess. There's a few aspects to them that are a bit different, but for the most part, they're both Asuka, but at the same time, not the same Asuka.
Yeah, one's a clone of the other, and they have slightly different existences because of that.
In fact, it's much in the same way that Neon Genesis Evangelion, the 95 anime run, is the same thing as the rebuild of Evangelion run, but they're not the exact same.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, because Asuka Shikinami is from Rebuild, whereas Asuka Langley Soryu is from the original 95 run, so it makes sense that the differences between those series are very comparable to the differences between the two Asukas.
Yeah, so I think, for simplicity's sake, we start with the 95 run of Asuka, then we address Rebuild and kind of talk about the differences and why that is.
And then we move on with our lives and accept that it is over.
Pretty much. So, Asuka, much like Shinji, 14-year-old child prodigy pilot that is one of the three central characters of the story, that being Shinji, Rei, and Asuka. Asuka herself, born December 4th, 2001, and the pilot of Unit 2. So, her father is never really mentioned by name. Father is an American, and then her mother, Kyoko, Zeppeli Soryu, in the 95 run specifically, is German-Japanese.
Such a fun combination.
So we find out that her mother was a scientist in Ahern, just like Yui was, and did the same contact experiment with Unit 2.
Yeah.
This one ended up leaving her split, essentially, with the soul in Unit 2 and the body insane in reality still, which kind of informs most of Asuka's traumas. But Asuka, much unlike Shinji, which is interesting, she was always set to be the pilot, whereas Shinji was more of an afterthought he could be the pilot.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, with Asuka, they didn't get any... Or with Asuka's mom, they didn't get any rays out of it, like they didn't get clones of her. Whereas I think the reason that Shinji was an afterthought is they had the clones of Yui with Lilith's soul. So there was probably like some expectation of she'll be a perfectly fine pilot for Unit 1, so there's no need to get Shinji involved. Whereas with Unit 2, they didn't have otherworldly beings that had the body of the mother and the soul of something else, so...
Yeah, and Kyoko's contact experiment seems to very much be for the purpose of making Unit 2 accessible for Asuka to be the pilot.
Yeah.
This seems to be only knowledge to her mother and the rest of Ahern, though, because the father, even though we don't get a lot of him, seems to be fully unaware of all of this.
To be fair, it is kind of a fucked up thing to do, of like, alright, so we're gonna do something that, if everything goes according to plan, your soul will exist inside this robot forever. Sorry, not robot, Evangelion / angel / human / alien / robot.
Exactly.
Your soul will be inside of that forever, but your body... Who knows? Maybe it'll come out, keep on living, and because it's soulless, maybe it'll abuse the shit out of your child. Who knows what'll happen? Like, as far as we can tell, everything that happened was exactly according to plan, and that makes the plan so fucked up.
Well, I don't think it was all according to plan. I honestly think, because the only contact experiment before this was Yui's, and she just fucking disappeared.
Yeah.
So they probably tweaked it thinking that they could keep the person around, which is why her physical body never vanished as well. But
unfortunately, it's hard to keep a person around with those. I mean, you can keep the body, but the body will try and kill off a doll in representation of the body's daughter.
I mean, as far as she was concerned, the doll was Asuka.
Exactly.
Which informs Asuka's trauma about dolls. Because she was,
yeah, it's
that's the most awkward situation. Is like, my parent loved the doll more than me, and then tried to kill the doll.
Yeah.
How do I feel about this?
Kind of explains why she hates Rei so much and keeps referring to her as a doll. Because of all of the trauma she's been through.
Yeah, although the Rei-Asuka relationship's an interesting thing, which we should touch on a bit more when we get to the character relationships.
Yeah.
But going back to Asuka's whole character, almost everything you need to know about Asuka and why she's the way it is informed through these flashbacks.
Yeah.
But when we first meet Asuka, she seems like the key protagonist of the story.
Hyper confident.
Really skilled, self-taught too. It's like she's not a prodigy in any sense of it. She works hard to be the best, and that kind of really shows, and that's where her confidence seems to come from. And then we find out, well, she's got to be confident because she's the best, because if she's not, no one wants her.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the key signs of who Asuka is as a character and how talented she is when she gets in Unit 2 with Shinji that first time, and she freaks out at him because he's not thinking in German, and she's like, fine, switch the interface to Japanese, I'll start thinking in Japanese, so this will go more smoothly. The fact that she can consciously make the decision to change the language she thinks in, key sign that, she has put in effort and is prepared for a lot of different potential outcomes.
Yeah, because we went finding out pretty quickly, Asuka not only is, an ace pilot, she also already has a university degree. We never find out what the degree is on, but she's, super intelligent, so she's very motivated, self-taught in a lot of aspects. And the only thing she's kind of shit at is, first, human connection. Who isn't in the series?
Literally every character in this universe is bad at that.
And writing in kanji.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason she's failing junior high.
Yeah.
She's passing everything else, but because she can't write in kanji, she's failing.
Yeah. She has a university degree and can't pass junior high school. It's pretty great.
Yeah. Well, but she does really good at math.
Yep.
She doesn't have to write anything down.
Yes.
And that's the only reason she, I guess, isn't getting kept back to year. Man, if that series went, slightly further past the third impact, that would have been a hilarious thing to see, she had to stay behind while Shinji and Rei graduate.
I just want to see one of the spin-offs where Evas don't exist, and it's just that, essentially I want to see the series that almost existed when Shinji went through third impact, and we see them, running around with toast in their mouth and everything like that. I want to see that world where Evas don't exist, and it's just Asuka doing her best at school and constantly being held back by the fact that she just can't write in kanji.
To be fair, that's the Angelic Days timeline. And in that one, Asuka, I think she grew up in Japan, even though she's German, American, Japanese. So I don't think she has the kanji problem anymore. Because she ends up falling into the role of the friend next door, childhood friend type character.
Sure. I prefer the timeline where she transfers over and for no explicit reason, because it's not like she's going there to pilot Avis and fight angels. No, she just transfers over for no apparent reason, and while there, has difficulty writing in kanji. That's just what the whole series is about.
Hey, here's the fun thing to think about further on that. I know we're going a bit of a tangent, but that Angelic Days timeline, that's a timeline where Evangelion still exists, because of how Rebuild works.
Yep. Jesus, yeah. Good for them.
Yep.
Anyways, back to Asuka, and how trauma has shaped her life, much like every character in the series. There's a lot of things we can say about a character, and it will apply to every other character in the series.
Their life was affected by trauma, and it affected the series as a whole. What character am I talking about? Could be anybody.
They're very talented at a lot of things, but their greatest weakness is making connections with other human beings. Every character.
I mean, to be fair, that does narrow it down a bit.
That's fair.
Because you could be talking about Misato, Kaji, Asuka.
Yeah.
Actually, kind of stops there. Ritsuko, I guess. Ritsuko had a few other problems. But the thing that I find the most interesting about Asuka is even though she comes in as this top shit character, we find out that it's all hot air, effectively.
Yeah.
And like the simplest thing will like just knock her over. She's the Straw House from the Three Little Pigs.
Yeah. She seems very strong, sturdy, and protagonist-like, and the moment not even things, the moment a singular thing doesn't go her way, it causes her to start spiraling.
Which is a Shinji being top dog.
Yeah.
For even slightly of a time frame.
Yeah. And then, the moment she starts spiraling, the next thing will cause her to spiral more aggressively, and it just gets worse and worse as time goes on. Like water spiraling down a toilet drain as someone flushes.
A very apt description of the whole situation.
Yeah. Asuka's life is like a toilet. Not what I expected to say today, but it's where I ended up.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Asuka is the character that, as long as they're being built up, they're probably the peak character for the pilots. But when it's not, and like the slightest thing goes wrong, you do the psychic attack to Asuka, as we saw with the Hallelujah beam, and then she's just fucked from that point on. She's
both extremes of pilots. When she's at her best, she's probably one of the best pilots, and when she's at her worst, she is the worst pilot because she just sits in a bathtub for 3 weeks straight not doing anything.
Although, to be fair, an interesting thing about Asuka when it comes to piloting the Eva, she's the one pilot who only ever fully hits top peak Evangelion output once. Because in order to have the full compatibility of the Eva, you need to fully open your arc to it, as Ray points out.
And she refuses to do that.
She has a wall that she refuses to fully put down. Shinji accidentally goes through it a few times.
Yeah.
But Asuka ultimately is the only person who can only do it at the very end when she realizes that it's her mother.
Yeah. Up until that point, she refuses to open her heart.
Yeah, and that's kind of the ultimate thing of... Asuka has a lot of depth to herself, but ultimately she makes herself two-dimensional because she won't open up to people. And that's what ends up leading to a lot of the conflicts she has within the series with other characters.
Yeah.
Because almost the exact same thing as Shinji, where Shinji, instead, what he wants is characters to give him everything, but not have to give her anything back. Whereas Asuka needs someone to start to her and kind of thaw her out. I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Shinji wants to receive everything from other people while giving nothing back. Asuka just wants to receive something from other people so she can start the exchange.
Yeah, and we see that better with the Rebuild series, where there's the better connection with characters, she opens up a bit more, where she never really gets that chance to shine in this one. Although, that could also be looked at as she made herself so reliant on Kaji, that with Kaji gone, when he dies, she had no support system left, and that's kind of the one factor that ultimately did lead to her spiral with no way back.
Yeah.
Because I think she wouldn't have hit that I want to die level if Kaji was still around.
Oh, I completely agree. And it was one of those things we could tell while watching it, where the moment Kaji stopped showing up, everything just started getting worse for her because she had built it up. It's the reason why you never build a table with one very sturdy leg and no other legs, because the moment that leg is taken away, nothing works. But if you have four, fairly sturdy legs and one goes away, it might wobble a bit, but it will stay standing. So
you can get away with one Shinji leg if you have some, 3 Gendo legs, I guess.
Yeah. Just, building her entire support system around a singular person, she was doomed to fail the moment that singular person was gone.
Well, to be fair, I don't think that was her goal I'm building my whole support system around Kaji. I think it was none of the other characters were able to acknowledge her. Misato was focused on her own thing. But at the same time, she's living with me, but Kaji's the one taking care of her, so I can focus on Shinji and his well-being, which she kind of did in a shitty way anyways. But at the same time, as soon as Kaji died, she was like, I need to find out what's going on here. Fuck the kids.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's Asuka's fault or anything. I'm just saying the way her support system was built, it had one pillar and nothing else. And the moment that one pillar was taken out, everything kind of went to shit. Whereas, as we see in Rebuild, she is willing to open up to more people, well, mostly because more people are willing to open up to her. And so, she's not as reliant on Kaji, and she still seems to be self-sufficient after the time skip when Kaji's gone.
Exactly.
If this was original run, and we had that time skip and Kaji disappeared during it, Asuka would just be lying in a pit somewhere after the time skip.
That's true. I don't think she would have handled the Wheelie situation as well.
Yeah.
But that's interesting, because Asuka, just like Shinji has two role models in the idea of Gendo to Kaji as like his male role models in life of the path he should go down.
Yeah.
Asuka's ends up being Misato and Ritsuko, with Misato being, funny enough, the positive role model and Ritsuko being the negative. And then Misato ends up becoming a pseudo-negative role model as soon as Kaji's gone as well. So it's like everyone's life just starts falling apart because Kaji's gone.
100%. Kaji's the glue that holds everything together.
And then Shinji had to give up his me time to go watch after the watermelons that he didn't really care about.
Yeah, exactly. God damn it. Those fucking watermelons. They're responsible for everything bad that happened in fucking Rebuild. But yeah, Asuka.
I think the interesting too is if you had to look at all the characters in the original run of Neon Genesis, I think Asuka quite possibly is the only character to have a full story arc with a payoff. Like that ends their story in a sense. Because with Shinji, his whole thing about like I need connection at the end, it feels like there's more or something missing to the story because there's a clear stuff is happening afterwards, and how is Shinji going to react in this world?
Yeah.
Whereas to Asuka's story, she finally learns to remove that wall in her heart and actually speak for herself, and that allows her to reach full synchronization with Unit 2. She pretty much beats all the MPEs, even though she ends up dying afterwards.
Because the MPEs are cheaters.
Yeah. And then, ultimately, after that, in human instrumentality, she calls Shinji on his bullshit. Like, she's able to say, like, because Asuka even comes up to Shinji and is like, yeah, I'll be yours, but you have to give me everything back. Like, everything of yours. And Shinji doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, you only want me to, you know, take care of you and give you all the stuff with nothing back, and that's not something that's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she actually does have a reasonable amount of growth and change over the course of the series. To the point where it feels like her arc is completed by the end of it.
Yeah, whereas Shinji's almost kind of comes off as an afterthought with more to it. Asuka's feels more realized, but going on in the background.
Shinji's kind of feels like an arc that is cut off halfway through, which kind of makes sense, because it doesn't feel like his arc is completed until the end of Rebuild, and it's picked up in Rebuild. But, yeah, Asuka actually feels like she has a complete arc, and that almost feels like why we had to get someone other than Asuka Soryu Langley in Rebuild, just because of the fact that Asuka Soryu Langley has a completed story to her, has a completed arc. Like,
yeah, I feel the exact same way about that thing. That's ultimately where the idea came from. And even though her arc was completed, I think Shikinami ends up being the logical next step of using that character once the story's done with that character.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it also, I guess, goes with the representation of Asuka in both versions, because in the original run of Neon Genesis, all the characters have a representation to Shinji that's part of the plot. So Rei, as we discussed, is kind of like the motherly figure. Yeah, there's the father, such that Misato is also kind of taking that like mother figure. And Asuka's the only character that doesn't have the motherly aspect applied to her.
Yeah.
It's more physical, like sexualization to Shinji, and that's how Shinji kind of sees her. And that ends up being the antithesis of the character when she comes to him as like, I will be yours, but you have to be only mine. And then he rejects it because it's not exactly how he viewed her, and also plays into the fact that he isn't able to see her traumas and stuff because he's only looking at her at that one aspect.
Yeah.
But once we move on to the Rebuild, that's no longer the representation of her character.
Yeah, exactly. We have a different version of her, vis-a-vis Asuka Shikinami, which is technically an entirely different character, but fills a very similar role.
Yeah.
In that she's a clone now. Specifically cloned of Asuka Soryu Langley, because they didn't want to use the actual Asuka Soryu Langley to pilot.
Well, yes and no.
Elaborate, please.
Okay, so Asuka Shikinami is a clone, but so we find out in the manga series that Asuka is a test tube baby, so she wasn't conceived through normal means. Timeline works a bit differently, but the implication is that it's the same as original Neon Genesis. So she's the daughter of her father and Kyoko through test tube, essentially.
Yeah.
And in the manga, her father left before that, and then she still made a test tube baby and had Asuka. So it's using the fact that 2 out of 3 times so far that's been the case. Most likely what happened is she was genetically created with Kyoko's DNA in a test tube state, and then that process was fun.
Fair.
And ultimately, this Asuka never truly knew parentage, in a sense, which ultimately leads to the same outcome. And then we find out that the purpose of the Shikinami series was much like the Ayanami series, to influence Shinji.
Yeah. Fucking Shinji, man. It all comes back to Shinji.
Yeah.
That's what they were singing about in Come Talk. It all returns to nothing. Shinji is nothing. He's worthless. It all returns to Shinji. I understand now.
Thus, End of Evangelion was actually a bad, depressing movie. Not a bad movie, and it wasn't fun. But, like, the outcome was bad.
It was depressing. It was sad.
And that's ultimately the whole thing about the Shikinami series. It's multiple clones. The original is probably that first clone. Whether it was Langley Soryu or not is not really
relevant.
Confirmed.
Yeah.
But it's also not relevant because Kyoko doesn't play a viable part in the story.
Yeah.
She's not even mentioned.
Yeah, she's not part of the trauma that leads to Asuka being who she is. The trauma is the fact that she was a test tube baby that was, or clone, or whatever you want to call it, that was specifically bred and raised to pilot Ava's and manipulate Shinji. Like, her whole existence was built around that, and so it leads to very similar trauma where she derives her entire self-worth, very similarly to how Soryu Langley did, and that she gains her self-worth from doing what she was bred to do, essentially.
Yeah, it's ultimately that in the original run, she felt like if she wasn't important to people, she had no value, when that wasn't the case.
This time,
This one, she knows she was actually built for this.
Yeah.
So not doing this literally gives her no purpose, and it's kind of almost the same arc that Rey had in the original of a self of identity. Rey did not believe she had an identity. She was just manufactured. And it was becoming her own being was Rey's storyline. Whereas for Asuka's, it was finding a way to have purpose without the intended purpose.
Yeah. It's a way to gain self-worth without just being what you were made to be.
Exactly.
Gaining a purpose of your own rather than the purpose that you're given.
Yeah, and that, from the story of the 95 run Asuka to the rebuild Asuka, you can see they're very different storylines that I think does warrant the name change. And you probably haven't realized this, but Ayanami, Shikinami, and Makinami all have the Nami thing, and they all happen to also be Japanese warships.
Yeah.
But also implies an interesting thing, and it was kind of a hint from the beginning about what the turn with this Asuka was going to be, because the Nami name, at this point, Ayanami and Shikinami, we can get inferred those names are manufactured.
Yes.
Which I guess raises the question of why is Makinami, but we also get her real name in the Race Upon a Time, or a name that she's also referred to is Mary Iscariot.
Yeah.
So indicating that Makinami's a fake name that she's using.
Yeah. I think this goes back to the whole curse of Ava, where they don't age once they start piloting Avas, and it could just as easily be she's pretending to be a clone of herself to explain the fact that she still seems so young. Yeah. So she gives herself a clone name.
But yeah, with Shikinami in this case, her not aging over the time gap, she says it's the Curse of Ava, and the high speculation for what the Curse of Ava is high contamination to Evangelions and LCL. Just kind of stunts your growth, in a sense, due to the nature of what LCL is. But some people have theorized, because if we find out, Shikinami is also fused with the Ninth Angel.
I mean, to be fair, we already know what the Curse of Ava is. We discussed this. It's when Futsuki ages for you.
Yeah.
We covered this in a previous podcast.
But ultimately, she's the reason that there's still conversation on what the Curse of Ava is.
Fair, yeah. Until I get confirmation of vis-a-vis Mari, which I'm probably not going to get. I mean, I might get in a couple weeks when we do our Mari episode of this miniseries. But much more likely, I'm not going to get concrete answers until we go through the manga.
Kind of.
Fuck you for making me go through the manga. manga now.
The manga's pretty good.
I'm not saying the manga's bad. I'm just saying, like, I feel like this is what my life is now. Is you said this was just going to be a short, limited podcast of us going through the Ava series, and every time we finish something, you're like, oh, don't worry, there's more Ava for us to go through now. And the next 12 years of my life will be me catching up on all the Ava, and only for more Ava to be released that I now have to catch up on.
I'm glad you understand.
I hate my life. Anyways, yeah, we won't get explicit answers to Mari's situation until we go through that series.
Well, it won't be explicit answers, and until something new comes out with more focus on Mari, I think a lot of it is meant to be kind of left open.
That's fair. But regardless, Asuka's the one concrete example we have of the curse of Evangelion, because Shinji was goop, so he wasn't going to age as goop. Rei might be another example, because we do know that Rei would age normally, given that we saw her as a small child at one point in time. And it's just, when they re-clone her, she comes out as the age she was. But the fact that she hasn't aged since then could be a sign that...
Well, it depends on what you're looking at, because we're not dealing with the original Rei, as Rei 2 was the one, the main one, for most of the series. In Rebuild, we never see Rei 3.
Yeah. Regardless, it's entirely possible that Rei is another example of someone not aging, because we don't know how long each of the Reis exist. But the fact that Rei Q looks the same as Rei 2 could be a suggestion that Rei also has not been aging over these years.
I think the biggest indicator that it stops her aging is we do know that Mari is not a clone.
Of course we do.
Yeah, and as we've already kind of established, she's much older than she seems.
Yeah.
So there is something to it that prevents the aging.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the purposes that Mari ends up serving within the storyline, kind of rectify what the Curse of Ava is, so that there's no real confusion about it, because Shinji being Goop means that you can't use Shinji as the litmus test for what it means, and then Asuka being an angel and Rei being an angel kind of fucks with it.
Yeah, so we're just left with Mari as the final example to explain it. And yeah, the way Fuyutsuki reacts to her kind of implies that she's been around a lot longer than we are led to believe.
Exactly. So, one of the other big changes between Langley to Shikinami is that the original Asuka is very much afraid of dolls because of what happened with her mother, whereas the current one isn't. And we can see that also in her relationship with Rei. So, the funny thing about Asuka is anyone not thinking she's the best or kind of ignoring her, she automatically decides, you're my enemy.
Of course.
Which is why Rei, not being human-like, also starts their rivalry in like an aggressive way, and she ends up hating Rei and calling her a doll and stuff, because she very clearly sees, oh, you only react to what you're told to do and all stuff. Which is also partially why I think in Rebuild, she ends up having more of like a friendly romantic rivalry with Rei, because Rei shows emotions because of her connection with Shinji. She actually reacts stronger to it.
Yeah.
And then that means she's like, oh, this is a person with her own opinions. She's not, I won't be friends with you unless I'm ordered to, because that's what it is. She's just has different priorities.
Yeah. She just doesn't like Asuka because Asuka sucks. In Rei's mind. That's not my opinion. That's me explaining Rei's opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's Rebuild Asuka, just, I guess, it's kind of like I respect your hustle, I guess, because when people kind of hit back at Asuka in Rebuild, she seems to have a little bit of like respect for like, oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
You're not taking my bullshit, I respect it.
I can accept that. What I can't accept is you just sitting alone not saying anything for 3 months straight staring at penguins. Can't accept that.
Yeah.
Can't accept you giving me a little bit of shit here.
Well, I think, because if we want to talk about that aspect of Asuka in Rebuild, I don't think she was upset that Shinji was like being alone, because this Asuka also has always kind of been fine with the concept of being alone. She never really wanted to interact with people. She just wanted to do her thing and leave it at that.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I don't know if you ever looked at any stuff about Asuka, like breakdown-wise, but her hobbies are listed as video games and harassing Shinji.
No, I haven't looked into anything like that.
Yeah, so this original run Asuka wanted those connections, and that was part of linked to the trauma, so she's friends with, Hikari and all that. Whereas in Rebuild, she never really gets a strong friendship with anyone, and she ends up having feelings for Shinji to a degree, but then never has anything happen of it, and she ends up, having the whole touching moment we saw to where she's like, I don't really want to be around people, and that I don't mind that, but sometimes it's fun.
Yeah,
that was kind of the thing. Like, she never really had that enrooted trauma aside from the fact that she knew she was manufactured.
Yeah,
but she even didn't seem to really have a care about that itself. So when Shinji comes back and they're in Village 3, I think the main thing she's pissed off is still the Bardio fight. I think she's ultimately still pissed off about that Shinji is still not aware that he is affecting all these people and thinks he's still like this isolated thing, and that's just really pissing her off.
Yeah, and to be fair, his inaction even then is still him refusing to make a choice about his life. Like, when he was... we're still talking about fucking Shinji in the Asuka episode.
Well, that's like Shinji connects to everything.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about Shinji, we're talking about Asuka's relationship with Shinji at this point. And we saw that he made a choice initially to go with the fake Ray Q, and she probably saw that as him finally making a choice one way or another. But then he just continues doing whatever he's told by Gendo, and once that all breaks down the way it does, he goes back to his way of trying to shut himself off inside and not make choices, and that's just gonna piss her off even more. Like, he hasn't learned a lesson over all the years that shit's been happening.
Exactly. I think that's ultimately where a problem with Shinji is. It's not, him wanting to be alone or anything like that. It's ultimately that he doesn't seem to be learning from the mistakes he's making.
Yeah.
And still thinks everything is about him.
Yeah, he still thinks he's the main character while she's the protagonist.
Yeah. And in fact, if the Bardiel fight would have went different, like even say the outcome still remained the same, Shinji tried to do something, I think the relationship between Asuka and Shinji at the end of the movie would have been how she was to him as soon as the movie started.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately her conflict with Shinji has always been about his inaction.
Yeah, his refusal to actually do the thing that needs to be done.
Well, not even do the thing that needs to be done, to make a choice.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, that's what I meant by do the thing that needs to be done. Someone needs to make a fucking choice, and he refuses to do it. But yeah, you're right. She doesn't even care that he's making bad choices. She cares that he's making bad choices through the choice to not make a choice.
Yeah. Because ultimately you could argue that, in hindsight, it was the right choice. But before that, going back on the wonder was the bad choice.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
That's the thing, like, Shikinami doesn't have the big trauma character development thing going on. It's more so resolving that conflict with Shinji storyline-wise, but then also kind of giving her a happy ending in a sense that she ultimately didn't get in the original run. Even though her character arc finished, she didn't get that happy ending.
Yeah.
Because one of the interpretations of the end of Evangelion is that Shinji forced Asuka to be her companion, not that she solely broke out of instrumentality by herself.
He was tired of being alone, so he forced her to come out of the goop to hang out with him.
Yeah, which, if that is exactly what happened, then that can also be an interpretation of the disgusting line.
Yeah. Which kind of makes sense. I mean, I'm trying to remember End of Evangelion right now. Just before we see him, we see, like, all the different grave markers that he made for everyone. Isn't hers destroyed at that point, too?
Yeah, and it has been confirmed by Ano that it was Asuka coming back. She destroyed her grave.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, I could see that as being part of it. Yeah. Asuka.
Yeah, overall, I think Asuka's probably up until Thrice Upon a Time, probably the strongest written character.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get upset about her becoming Shikinami and a drastic change to her, but it only really changes her origin, which then affects what happens to her throughout the story.
Yeah, it changes, like, her motivations, but not hugely. She has the same goals, it's just the reasons for wanting those goals are ever so slightly different.
Exactly, and as much as it might suck to say, I think she's a better character when she's not latched on to Kaji.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I love Kaji too, but yeah, it's 100%. It's one of those things where when she's not so deeply ingrained in the character of Kaji, her character actually has room to grow outside of Kaji.
Yeah, I think what we got from Asuka in the original run is more realized and authentic in Rebuild because she's not as, I guess, held back by those traumas and those crutches.
Yeah.
So what we get from Asuka in Rebuild is more genuine and not kind of like, the hot air bluster.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of people say, oh, Asuka gets sidelined a lot in these movies, but I think that also ties back into, well, her story was already kind of realized in the original 95 run in Evangelion. So there's not really, do you do that exactly again?
Yeah, it's... Either way, people are going to be upset, because there's essentially three options for what to do here. There's either what they went with, which is, for the most part, kind of sideline her to focus on other characters. There's two, spend a significant amount of time telling a story that's already been told and just retelling her completed story arc, which is just going to upset people, because why did I pay to see these movies when half the content was just the exact same as the original movies? And then the third option is change her arc enough that you have something new, and then people are just going to be upset that you have further changed Asuka, because why is Asuka so different from the Asuka that I know and love? So
yeah.
It was a no-win scenario, and I think they went with the most reasonable choice, which was a little bit of option 3 and a little bit of option A, which is...
And to be fair, they do this with a lot of characters in Rebuild, because I think the ultimate idea is Rebuild is fun to watch if you're just coming into the storyline, but you don't get a lot of the character stuff because the ultimate idea was it was taking the storyline you already knew and evolving it. So the idea is, I already know what Kaji's all about. I already know what Misato's all about. I know what Asuka's all about. There's no reason to rehash this. And they didn't do it in a way like, oh, you're only going to understand Rebuild if you watch the original run. I think it has something in there for the casual viewer and the person who gets really into it. And it did it in such a brilliant way. And I think that's probably the best way they could do it. If you want to know more about these characters, well, then you have loads upon loads of other lore that you can go through the original run, the manga, everything else, to learn these characters. But if you're not that interested, you just want to see the story unfold, they give you just enough that you need to understand where that character is going.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's kind of some of the ultimate fun of the Evangelion series is, no matter what you go into, Shinji's always going to be Shinji, Asuka's always going to be Asuka. Their backstory is probably going to be a bit different, and that's going to change slightly their motivations, but the core concept of the character is always the same. Yeah. Asuka always is struggling to find her self-worth. Rei is always struggling to find a sense of self, and Shinji's always trying to get that connection that he feels is missing. And that's the core of the characters. And a lot of people do say is that Asuka got sidelined, but I think that's just the nature of what Rebuild was. Asuka really had closure to her story. We know everything about Asuka. There's no point of going into it again. So ultimately, all you can do is do a payoff to the character and not the storyline that she was going.
100%. Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you put it like that.
Okay, so with that, I think it's about time to move into the question segment. So, do you happen to have any questions about Asuka herself?
Let's get right into the audience questions.
The audience questions? Okay, let's get these pulled up. So these are the questions we were asked through the Instagram page. So make sure to keep an eye on there and answer those questions if you want. But again, if you happen to have a question that you feel like we didn't answer, feel free to send us an email at whatismypodcastabout@gmail.com. We'll make sure to address those in the next episode. So for the first question, we have from EXVDUS. Explain the situation with her mom and the doll.
So we kind of touched on this during the episode, but the whole situation with her mom and the doll is that after going through the contact experiment where her soul got left inside of the Eva, her mom has become very detached from the world, is how I think I'm going to phrase it, because she doesn't fully have her soul anymore. And so she's kind of just running through the motions at that point, based purely on instinct, which is why she still, wants to take care of her daughter, but views the doll as her daughter more so than her actual daughter, so she spends all of her time wanting to take care of her doll, which is why she has that weird relationship with the doll. And then because she doesn't have a soul, it becomes difficult for her to go on living, so she wants to not live, but doesn't want to leave her daughter in a world where she doesn't live anymore, so she decides to kill her daughter and herself at the same time.
Yeah, it's because she feels that the husband doesn't want them anymore, and they're a burden on his life.
Yeah, so she kills herself and her daughter, not realizing that she's not killing her daughter, she's killing her doll, and traumatizing her daughter instead.
Yeah, and because of that strong trauma of dolls linked to that traumatic event, then she just ends up having, that's reminding her of that rough past, and that's why she doesn't like dolls.
Yeah.
This one's from Angelo_SRZ. Why did she caress Shinji's cheek in End of Evangelion? So the beach scene, obviously, which is disgusting when Shinji's choking the shit out of her. I think this one is just Asuka is probably the character who's grown the most through the original run, and I think because she's able to understand herself better, she understands what Shinji needs.
Yeah, what he's going through and how he probably doesn't even fully realize she's real at this point.
Yeah, because even though there's the theory that Shinji forced Asuka to be in that situation, I think Asuka was able to manifest her. I don't think Shinji had any part in it. I think she just managed to get out. And I don't think Shinji can really tell reality right now, because he's by himself for who knows how long. So I don't even know if he knows that that's Royal Asuka, and he's kind of like having a reaction. So when she reaches out, touches his cheek in not like an affectionate way, but like in a caring way,
yeah,
he's able to understand that she's real, and that's why he starts crying.
She's essentially conveying, you're not alone anymore, and so he finally realizes this isn't a hallucination, there's actually another person for him to exist with.
So he's breaking down and crying out of the fact that he's not alone anymore.
Yeah.
He's finally has that connection that he's wanting.
Meanwhile, tears are for the weak, and that's why she thinks he's disgusting.
Ultimately, I guess. So this question is from Gabri.Cavallaro. Cavallaro?
Sure.
Are Asuka and Shinji the same?
No. Very different characters.
They have a lot of things that seem close and overlapping, as I mentioned before. The root of their thing is connection to others, but through different methods, where, as I mentioned, Asuka needs someone to essentially put effort into her and kind of allow her to loosen up and essentially make those connections, whereas Shinji doesn't really ever have the intent on giving those feelings back. He just wants people to take care of him, in a sense.
Yeah.
This one is from MSROCAQ. On the last part of Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Asuka's age, is she still 14 or is she 28? So I guess the clarification for this is Asuka in the last two movies is 28.
Yes.
But she's got the Curse of Eva, which kept her at the age of 14.
So she is mentally and emotionally 28. She is physically 14. At the end, after Shinji does his voodoo magic to teleport everyone out of the world, I do think she would be aged up to 28.
And
physically.
That's the part I think is a bit confusing, because we don't know if it happened specifically or not, because when she's on the beach scene with Shinji at the end, she's physically 28 now, and that world is more of, I don't know if that's Shinji and how he perceives Asuka, or if it's just how she's perceiving herself, because she even wonders if she's dreaming, but they're in the imaginary space, and because of that,
you can manifest your imagination.
Yeah, so it's, I don't know if it's Asuka that's seeing herself as she truly sees herself, or it's Shinji as he now sees her, but that's why she's aged up in that scene, and then she sends him back to where Kensuke is. And when she wakes up in the pod, she's wearing the jacket again. And I don't know if she's aged up at that point, because the scene's not long enough, and it's not like really focusing on her that much.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say if she's physically aged up when he sends her back out. I think ultimately it doesn't truly matter.
Yeah. Either way, the character is 28. It's just whether she's physically 28 or physically 14 is not of huge importance to the story.
Yeah, I think the ultimate idea is she's ready to make those connections with people, and her getting sent back means that she can live out in Village 3 without any of those concerns that she had before about being separate.
Yeah.
In fact, she's probably separated from the angel now, too.
Yep, she exists on her own.
Yeah. So, Asuka in the two movies, she is 28, that's the whole thing, but physically she doesn't age up, and there's some mental limitations on that as well due to the Curse of Eva, but yeah, ultimately, she's been around for 28 years. So here's one from Primus versus Unicron, and it is her dad in the manga possibly Gendo via sperm donation? So this is an interesting
I can't answer that question, Keith.
You'll be surprised about how many is Gendo secretly X's father plotlines or theories in the Neon Genesis universe. But I mean, I guess you could say it's possible, because again, we never get any mention on specifically who her father is. The only thing we get is that he left her for the German nurse, or left Asuka's family for the German nurse, and they got married to her. So I think we do know in the anime run, not Gendo.
100%. Unless Yui was at one point a German nurse.
Yeah. In Rebuild, we also know not Gendo.
Yes.
In the manga, I think it's pretty much the same as Rebuild, though. I think, ultimately, what is the purpose of Gendo being Asuka's secret father?
Oh, because she had a bad time growing up, which would imply she had a shitty father. And
well, then, aren't we all the children of Gendo in that sense?
True. Sometimes I feel like a child of Gendo.
But I think that's the thing to look at. Like, some theories are fun. To like, oh, definitely, this could be an interesting way to look at it. But I think ultimately with Neon Genesis, and you can definitely apply it to other media as well. What purpose does the twist or the secret of this do for the rest of the story?
Does this actually add anything to the story or change your interpretation of any events?
Yeah. And
if it doesn't, then it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not.
And that's the thing. There's no payoff to Asuka being Gendo's child in any aspect.
It's not like at one point she has... Like, it'd be one thing if she had an impactful scene with Gendo or something.
Yeah.
Like, if that happened, then it's like, oh, this is the payoff to her being his daughter or something like that.
And that's the thing. I think in Rebuild, I don't think she shares a scene with Gendo.
No, I don't think
in the original end of Evangelion, she shares, what, 3 or 4 scenes with him?
Yeah. None of them, like, big enough to, like, actually make a difference.
Yeah, Gendo and Asuka don't really have any connections for the story. So I guess, is it possible that he was, through sperm donation, the father? Yeah, sure. But is he? I think it's unlikely.
Yeah.
It kind of...
Gendo's not exactly like a mythical creature who changes the story by being someone's father.
I mean, I don't know about that.
The only character's story who is changed by having Gendo be their father is Shinji. Shinji's life is made explicitly worse by having Gendo be his father. But no one else... Like, if it was revealed that Misato was secretly Gendo's daughter, and, like, Misato's actual father was just the man who was married to his mother, and Gendo secretly did shitty things and is now Misato's father, it wouldn't change the story in any way, shape, or form.
Although we do get confirmation that he's not Misato's father.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think when it comes to Asuka's father, the whole thing of it is it's not important, because the thing that he does or represents within Asuka's life is pretty much the same way that Gendo is in Shinji's life.
Yeah.
They had no interest beyond, the general stuff, so they never really put anything into their child.
Yeah.
And Asuka's personality is kind of affected by that.
Yeah. It adds nothing to the story for Asuka to be Shinji's daughter, so... Shinji's daughter. Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I meant. And that's the way I feel about a lot of these fan theories that are out there. Like, some of them are interesting, and some of them add impact to scenes that already exist. But if your theory is just, wouldn't it be neat if blank, and it does nothing for the story to make it true or false, then I don't think there's any actual reason in considering that line.
Exactly.
Well then, any more questions?
No, that was it for the questions that we had there. So, for some interesting stuff about Asuka, I guess, to go through. So, Asuka obviously shows up in a lot of different media forms as well. And through everything, surprisingly, she's the character who's most associated with the Spear of Longinus.
Fair.
She, on a frequent basis, has it as her primary weapon in games and stuff like that. And, in fact, most of Asuka's statues as well come with her wielding the Spear of Longinus.
Does she ever even actually wield it once in the original series? So I'm not even considering other series right now. But in the original series, I think the only Eva pilot who ever actually wields the Spear of Longinus is specifically Rey, because she's the one who takes it out of Lilith. She's the one who hucks it at the moon.
She's also the person that puts it in Lilith.
Yeah. So it's always Rey who wields the Spear of Longinus in the original series.
95 right now. The closest thing, I guess, for her using the spear is in the fight in End of Evangelion against the NPEs.
Where she uses the fake spears?
Yeah, but she doesn't know, because they're not spears of Longinus at that point, right? They look like these double blade things. And,
yeah.
And she takes them from them and starts using them. And the only time we notice that it's a manufactured spear is when it gets thrown and shifts into one and pierces through a T field.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, so it's a little interesting. Like, Asuka is usually the one that's heavily associated with it after the fact.
Yeah, it's super weird that she would be so heavily associated with it when... so I don't know about the manga, maybe she has some interactions with it in the manga. But outside of that, most of these things that would be making the association with her would be post-original series, but pre-rebuild. So...
And you would think it'd be Rei that would be associated with
it. Yeah, and exactly that. Because Rei was so heavily associated with the Spear of Longinus in the original series, you would think it would be Rei. I could even maybe accept Shinji, but because he gets speared by it multiple times, but I guess that's not
exactly...
Well,
the funny thing about Shinji is, Shinji never actually directly wields the Spear of Longinus. He wields the Spear of Gaius and Cassius.
Yeah, but I mean, he does get speared by the Spear of Longinus multiple times.
Yes, and in fact... It gets even funny when you think about it, because you would think Rei would be associated with the Spear of Gaius, because that's the one that was in Lilith's moon, but she only ever uses Longinus, and Kaoru uses Gaius.
That's true! Jesus, what's going on here?
Oh, sorry, not Gaius, Cassius.
Cassius, yeah. Gaius is the one that the humans make, the Spear of Hope.
Yeah.
And then... God, that's just... peculiar to me.
Yeah.
Fuck, the spears make no sense, man.
Asuka was actually the design for the original main character. Before they decided to switch to a male protagonist, they made Shinji.
Yeah, because Anno's last work had to involve a female main character.
So Asuka was originally, during the first production, the main character.
So what you're saying is the fact that Shinji clearly thinks of Asuka as the main character has some basis in the real world.
It's just Anno's, passiveness showing in the thing.
Yeah.
I really want Asuka to be the main character.
I think of Asuka as the main character, and because Shinji is me, Shinji also thinks of Asuka as the main character.
That's how this works. Now, whether the plot would have been the exact same or perhaps the same relationship with Gendo, in a sense, we don't know that. We just know when it was in the storyboarding, working on stuff, when the character was to be female, the design was later used for Asuka as a character.
Fair.
Even though Shinji himself is also just kind of a reskin of Nadia.
Yeah. Way to go, Anno.
With Asuka becoming the ninth angel, that means that of the original primary pilot characters, like the main ones, so Kaoru, Rei,
Shinji's the only one who's not an angel in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
Once you introduce Mari, it still is 60% angel pilots.
Yeah. Shinji effectively... majority now is angel pilots, and from the original run, Shinji's the only Lilin pilot, or fully Lilin pilot, through everything.
Yeah, that's true. So if you look at the original run entirely, and don't even consider what happens in Rebuild, it's 50% angel, 50% human. If you just look at
you gotta count Toji as well.
Oh, I guess Toji does also pilot very briefly. But even then, he gets corrupted by Bardiel.
So hypothetically, he probably was in the same boat as Asuka.
Yeah. So I'm willing to go back to it's 60% angel, or 60% angel in some way, shape, or form, and 4% pure Lilin.
Well, I guess at the same time, not pure angel.
Yeah.
They're Lilin angel hybrids.
Yeah, so it's 60% some form of angel and 40% pure Lilin. And then if you allow in rebuilding and just look at those pilots, it's still... So now we're ignoring Toji, because Toji wasn't a pilot in Rebuild. And now we're back to just having it be fucking 60% angel again, because Asuka gets that treatment. So yeah. But we introduced Mari, who is essentially Asuka's replacement as the pure Lilin pilot.
Another interesting thing for Asuka is her hair color changes in multiple versions. So in the original run, she's a redhead. In Rebuild, she's auburn. And in the manga, she's blonde.
Jesus. Yeah, she does change a lot.
Yeah. So a lot of aspects that are changing between those concepts with her. So this is more of a production side of things. And again, focusing only on things that haven't come through already on Fun Facts. So I'm not going to talk about the Wall Jericho thing and all that. But Asuka was confirmed to have been, the idea was to have her be the romantic interest for Shinji, and that was how the initial plan was to end with them together. But obviously it never came of that. And then obviously that's not the plot line that's developing once we get to the Rebuild series. And even though it does look like it's Mari and Shinji together at the end, ultimately, as explained by the creators, the idea in Neon Genesis is not to say Shinji ends up with anyone, because ultimately that's not a point of the story.
The whole point of the story towards the end is to stop deriving self-worth from others. So if he just ended up being happy because he was in a relationship with someone else, that's kind of a Pyrrhic victory, because he's still getting his happiness from someone else. So the whole point is that he has to be happy on his own at the end.
Exactly.
Not that he has to be single, he just needs to be gaining happiness on his own, and then whether he's in a relationship or not is antithetical to the whole problem.
Exactly. And Asuka's whole interest with Shinji seemed to stem from him being a pilot as well, so that was derived from the Evangelions, but ultimately, originally she was supposed to be the romantic interest, and then the story went in another direction with that.
Yeah.
And then by the time Rebuild came around, it was no longer an idea of does Shinji end up with anyone, and that whole purpose to her character also kind of went away, which in a turn also I felt made her a bit more of a stronger character in Rebuild. But that's, again, me applying a lot of things to the character based off my knowledge of the character from Neon Genesis into the Rebuild series, is applying that. Oh, probably a very similar character, which she helped with.
Yeah.
And for the last fun fact, Asuka is the only Evangelion pilot out of all of them to only pilot one Evangelion.
Yeah, it's true. Kaoru controls multiple ones. Shinji very briefly is inside Unit 0.
He
Also pilots Unit 13.
Yep. Rei uses 0 and 1, as well as the Rei clones use 9 through 12.
Yep. And, I mean, Toji only pilots 1.
Toji doesn't really get counted as a pilot a lot.
We just counted Toji as a pilot a moment ago. I'm willing to count Toji as similar to Rei. And yeah, Mari pilots multiple.
5, 2, and 9.
Way to go, Mari.
I mean, I guess if you want to count Evangelion 2 and Evangelion 2 Improved as two separate units.
I don't. I don't want to count them as two separate units.
Although, it depends on how you want to count the Bardo situation, because with both Toji and Asuka, they never really piloted it.
Yeah, that's true. We got inside. You know what? Fuck it. Everyone except Toji's the only pilot who's only piloted a single Ava. Everyone else has piloted at least 2.
Fair enough.
Fuck you, Asuka. I'm taking this trophy away from you and giving it to the 40-year-old man who's still in high school.
I think that means he's disqualified from piloting an Ava, because you have to be 14.
Yeah, you have to be 14 to 28 as long as you're still in a 14-year-old's body. But then again, Toji's reclassified, because Toji may be 40, but he's very clearly stuck in a 14-year-old's body.
He might be the oldest Ava pilot.
Yeah. Even older than Mari.
Yeah. But that's pretty much the end of the fun facts there for Asuka. I already the other fun fact I prepared today was the thing that she likes video games and harassing Shinji, but we already went into that.
Of course, yeah. Well then, I suppose the next question is whether or not we like Asuka, I guess? Because it's our final thoughts on Asuka.
Ultimately, as I said, like in the original run, Asuka by far was my favorite character, because I felt like, story-wise, she had the truest full arc in my mind, and obviously the first time anyone watched Neon Genesis without, me explaining everything as we go through, it's very confusing, and I was like, what the fuck did Shinji do?
Yeah.
At least Asuka had something.
See, I think I'm actually going to disagree with you here, where I really like Asuka. I don't think I would put original run Asuka as the best character in the original run. I don't know who I would, but I don't think I would put Asuka at the top.
Kaji.
Probably Kaji.
Well, Kaji's one of my favorite characters too, but I think out of the pilots, Asuka was the... If the story actually... So if Anno's true vision of having Asuka be the main character had happened, I think that would have been a very interesting storyline. But saying this is bad without it, but I think that would have been a much more interesting one because of just how Shinji is as a character.
No, you've made your point clear. You think Neon Genesis is a bad anime, and you could have done better. Way to put that on the internet there, Keith. Yeah, no, I like Asuka. I just think there are other characters I prefer in the original run. That being said, I do also really enjoy Asuka Shikinami. I think even Rebuild had a very solid version of Asuka.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think Rebuild made the character better, and she might not be my favorite character in the Rebuild franchise, but it's definitely... I thought she was like one of, if not the best character in the original run.
Yeah.
And then they made her better.
Yeah. The only problem is they also made all the other characters better as well.
Yeah. And so with that, we'll wrap up this episode on Asuka Shikinami and Asuka Langley Soryu. So if you'd like to send us an email, you can send us an email at whatsmypodcastabout@gmail.com. We also have the YouTube channel where we upload the episodes every Wednesday like we do on all podcasting platforms. Please like, favorite, leave a review, subscribe, pass it on to a friend. Word of mouth definitely helps. The channel's been growing exponentially because of everyone listening, so keep it up. You're doing the right things, I suppose.
Spread the word of the Lord, except by the Lord I mean this podcast.
The Neon Genesis.
I did just refer to us as gods, and I'm sticking by that. Spread our word to the rest of the land. And what can we expect next time on this podcast, Keith?
So, next time we're going to be covering the second highest character in the poll, Rei-Nami. So we're going to do a full breakdown on that character, so make sure to join us because it'll be a lot of fun.
And as always, plenty of fan service.